Welcome. My name is Neeli Bendapudi. I am the Provost and Executive Vice Chancellor at KU. It gives me great joy to see so many of you here, and I know, having walked over in this cold weather, that there's many more coming. Just give it a few minutes. This is hard to believe, but it's our fourth annual The Power of Sport conference. When we started it, a whole bunch of us together, started with the business school and the Langston Hughes Center. Professor Alexander, for sure, is the moving, guiding force behind this, and Kansas Athletics. We did not dream that it would get this big. I am so happy because this has been a venue where we have had provocative speakers we may not always agree 100% with everything they say, but we have been a better campus because of the people who've been here. There's no question in my mind. We have more formal thank yous because the list of sponsors has grown way beyond, and they'll all be recognized by Etienne, who will come up here. I wasn't planning to say anything to you, but I come up and they say, will you say 3 words? And any of you who know me know that that's never a problem. So I'm going to stop with this. I'm just glad. Thank you for being here. This is so vital, so important, so intellectually stimulating, so socially relevant. There's nowhere else I would rather be, so I'm glad that you are here. So thank you, Sean, and thank you, everybody, and I'll turn it over to Etienne. Etienne Thomas. I should do the whole name, please.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us for this 4th installation of the Race and Sport Symposium, The Power of Sport, which highlights and provokes discourse surrounding the intersection of race and sport in our society. The symposium began and remains a collaboration of the Department of Athletics, the School of Business, and the Academic Department of African and African American Studies, in conjunction with multiple campus partners. I am Etienne Thomas, Associate Director of Athletics for Student Life, and I bring you greetings on behalf of Dr. Cheyenne Zenger, our Director of Athletics, Dr. Paige Fields, Dean, School of Business, and Dr. Clarence Lang, Chair of the Department of African and African American Studies. Welcome to this year's celebration of race and sports. How fitting a day for this event as we begin the recognition of Black history in this country, that we should gather this evening and have the opportunity to hear firsthand how race and sport impacted the lives of 2 KU men's basketball greats, and 2-time All-American Darnell Valentine and former assistant coach Lafayette Norwood. And to have former writer and now ESPN editor Claire Smith, who covered America's favorite pastime for the bulk of her storied career, and in the year we celebrate 50 years of women's sports at KU, as the first female keynote for this event. Tonight will undoubtedly give us a glimpse into these pages of history that some of us may not be familiar with, while for others it may be a flashback, and make us keenly aware that while we have come a long way, there is still work to be done to ensure that the conversation becomes action and outcomes. This event was partially made possible by the financial and human resource contributions of the 3 major sponsors and their representatives as part of the event planning committee. I would ask any members of the committee who are present to please stand and be recognized. Thank you. As in sport, it takes a team. And we are thankful to the following co-sponsors: the Office of the Chancellor, the Office of the Provost, Office of Multicultural Affairs, K-Club, KU Alumni Association, the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, the School of Journalism and Mass Communications, the Department of American Studies, and Health, Sport, and Exercise Sciences, and the Sport Management Program. Thank you for your support and for your commitment to race and sport. Now please join me in welcoming to the stage Dr. Sean Alexander, Director of the Langston Hughes Center and Chair of the Event Planning Committee and moderator for the evening. Thank you.
Good evening. Is my mic working? All right. So good evening. Welcome to, as now has been said for the third time, the fourth annual Race and Sports Symposium. This is one of my favorite days of the year here at KU, and it came out of, really I always like to say, it came out of discussions with myself and many others, but particularly Provost Neely, over a couple of years in discussing what type of place we were and where we could have conversations about race. I'm going to move that. So, and we thought that where we live here at the University of Kansas is a sports-centered campus, and using the intersections of race and sports, business, the high-powered business of collegiate athletics, to have that discussion was an important place for us to be. And so I thank you for coming out for the third night, or the fourth time of this event. And I get the great pleasure every year of doing the panel discussion, which to me is one of my favorite parts of the event, because we bring back former KU athletes and coaches and people connected with KU athletics. And this year we have two greats with us, Coach Lafayette Norwood and Darnell Valentine, former KU basketball player, NBA player, two incredible human beings in many ways, not just athletes. And so I welcome you.
Thank you.
And so I get to ask questions, but also try to stay out of the way as much as possible. That's my favorite thing. So, and students are laughing at that. You know I don't stay out of things very often. But I will say, I want to start the conversation in Wichita. Both these truly exceptional men come out of Wichita. In fact, I had to stop for a moment today because in social media, someone out of Wichita saw again the release that we were doing this event. And they said, two of the greatest to ever come out of Wichita, and someone better from Wichita better get up there and cover this event. Which I thought was very nice. So what was it like in Wichita? What is Wichita as a place for you in the mid-1970s into the 80s?
Coach, this is something that we normally always do. We always defer.
I was just going to say, that's what he told me on the phone, is Coach has a lot to talk about. So.
During the time that I was there, in terms of athletics, it was a very interesting time period for all of us. That is, we were kind of in the process of making transition from traditional type athletics, traditional type living, to the transition and going to, I think, things that was existing around our country, and particularly basketball. Then it was not very fashionable to have black coaches as head coaches or even assistants. And we had players that were talented, and of course players that were very good. By the same token, they weren't featured because of positions. There were some that couldn't play football unless they played on the line. And there were some that let them play, and we had one in particularly, Curtis Mcclinton, who is one of our former athletes here at the university. As talented he was, as graceful a runner and powerful runner as he was, they would only allow him to play on his high school team. And most of that time was defensive end. But when he come to the University of Kansas, we found out that he's one of the greatest running backs that Kansas have had. So those are some of the things that we had to encounter as we were coming along. So it was just a transition period, and this timing for us was the time to make those type of changes.
I'm gonna fast forward a little bit, Coach. You went way back. But as a youth growing up in Wichita, you know, you just wasn't aware of all the impediments that were that was there. And as a young kid, we were able to begin to play in our youth basketball program called Biddy Basketball. And for me, that opportunity to have exposure, because see, in my neighborhood, my whole world existed about a 3-block radius. You know, the kind of cars people drove, the kind of attitudes and the kind of thoughts that people had, that's what I kind of subscribed to. And Biddy Basketball, the exposure, being able to be in a program that allowed me to see other cultures, other way of living, other ways of thinking outside that 3-block radius was huge. Because in our community, we're just trapped in that mindset. And the exposure basketball was able to allow me to then become under the guidance of Coach and come to KU and then go into the NBA and what I do now.
Mm-hmm. Good. So let me ask you about Biddy Basketball. I think Biddy Basketball was for many of us, you know, growing up in the 70s and the 80s, Biddy Basketball was the first introduction, usually run through the Y, the local Y. And it, you know, started us usually 4th, 5th grade before there was there's not really a Parks and Rec. Biddy Basketball is Parks and Rec for us. But today we've switched away from Biddy Basketball. Some communities have Biddy Basketball, but most communities have private leagues run to their system. Lawrence is a perfect example of that. We still have Parks and Recs, but we have a separate system called Hoopsters and others, which are paid leagues for youth to join. What do you think is maybe the trap of that, of something that it becomes a social economic class that you're joining this group, rather than it's Parks and Rec and teaching you the community, bringing people together, where rather you're almost becoming the forerunner to an AAU system at a very young age?
Well, for me, I see it as a commercialization of the process. It's all about, because the monies have gotten so huge at different levels, and especially in basketball, where the lifespan of a young man is 17, 18 with nothing, all of a sudden he's in power with millions of dollars by the time he's 19. The investment, the return on investment has become so rampant in the minds of it's become a business transaction now. And of course, there are kids that there are a number that make it, and then there are many that don't, but yet still they're not equipped to take on different pathways to successful living, because they've been so targeted and conditioned to think that, hey, I'm gonna be an NBA player, and it's just not the facts.
Absolutely. Good.
I might just even add this portion, as you mentioned about some of the origination of Biddy Basketball. That's how I kind of got my start in basketball, wondering while I was in college, what am I going to actually do when I get out of school? And I fumbled with the fact I want to be in the business and things of this nature, but opportunities were somewhat limited at that time. So one day I just gotten out of college, and I was at my house across the street, well, next door really, to a young man. He said, "Mr. Norwood, would you go with me down to the Salvation Army? They have a team and a conference, a league down there, and they're just cheating us. We can't ever win because they're cheating us." So I took it on myself to go down after a period of time of thinking and to spend some time with them. And because at that time, the innocence, I think, of basketball wasn't quite as forward as Darnell just got to mention at that time. And this was back in the late 50s, 1950s. And go down there, and it had one team, They had one team that had basically all black youngsters. And the rest of the teams, they were all of other complexions. And true enough, they were good. They were very good, but it was just a fun thing for them. And they hadn't realized the potential at that point in time of what basketball, the avenues it could take them towards success. So I got involved with them, and we become very fortunate to become a little better and a little better each year. And so we become champions of that particular year and that particular event. So we go to the national tournament, which is back in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And Wichita, through the Salvation Army, become one of the powers across, we call it the World's Championship, which includes other countries, South America. We had some in South America, Venezuela, all those particular places. And they would bring teams, and we were fortunate enough to win the entire World's Championship, which jumpstart, I think, basketball in Wichita.
What was the transition for both of you in coming from Wichita to a place like Lawrence, Kansas? They're both in Kansas, but they're very, very different places.
Yes, they are. You want me to answer that? Try to answer
Either one.
First?
I know you're going to throw it back to Coach at some point. So.
I'm going to defer to Coach. He's the coach. Coach is the coach. Go ahead, Coach.
You had reference to us coming to
university, to the Lawrence community, the university. What was the transition like? I mean, you had gone through a few more steps before you got here, but
for me, it was very unusual. First of all, even coming to the University of Kansas, I always, as a youngster, I originated coming out of Oklahoma. The only thing I knew about at that time, education-wise, which made sense, was Langston University. That's all I knew about. I heard about other schools, Oklahoma A&M, University of Oklahoma, but that was a no-no. So Langston was my extent. So when I left there and come to Wichita, things began to change. And so when that change come into effect, University of Kansas is one of my favorite schools for whatever reason. And I think I was destined to be here at the university for some reason. I enjoyed the play of the Clyde Lavellas. I enjoyed the play of the Kelly brothers, all that type of, and then I enjoyed the Olympic approach. So in making my transition from playing bitty basketball, or coaching bitty basketball, I should say, to coaching as an assistant at the school which I attended in high school, Wichita East, to becoming the head coach at Wichita Heights. The transition that was here was Ted Owen. See, all the negatives was there, but Ted Owen made a decision to hire me to be on staff. And in doing so, he ran against a lot of oppositions. And I don't know whether Ted really realized the historical approach that was being made at that time. There were, again, like I said, it was not fashionable to have a black assistant coach in the Big Eight. So I was the first one to come in at the University of Kansas, which was, I started running into issues all around. And I got to the point where Ted gave me an assignment. Coach Owen gave me an assignment. He wanted me to coach the defense. We had another coach, assistant coach, was Bob Hill. They had him handling the offense. And for whatever reason, we become well known for holding our opponents at low numbers, which becomes kind of a national type phenomena. And people begin to look at me and say, hey, that guy is a pretty good coach. But when we lost to Wichita State, that's the worst coach in the world. So, you see, it played its role, of course, but the point is, that was one of the transitions. But and I don't want to hold this too long because I know you have something to say, but the thing that I think affected me more than anything when I did come to the University of Kansas, Coach Owens didn't know too much about me outside of some of the things I did success-wise, or the records that we achieved at that time. But I never forget He had me to come up here my first day it was on a Saturday night in 1977 in June. And I said, well, Coach, what do you want me to do? He said, well, tomorrow we're going to open up camp. I said, okay. He says, I'm going to want you to handle the camp. Had no idea what he was saying in terms of numbers. 600 plus young men. He had no idea how I was going to control them. I did, though. I did. And the next day when that come up, I think it surprised him and some of the parents because we had one of the greatest camps ever before I got here. That was under Sam Miranda. Sam Miranda was a great coach and a great disciplinarian. But when we got through with him that Monday morning, I think they found out things hadn't changed. And we had one of the greatest experiences. And with the way I handled the camp, which was surprising again to him, was the fact that we were coming on a military type approach, which I used, and it worked out great. And I think Coach Owens thought I was the greatest camp counselor there was. But those are the things that I did. So those are the transitions, I mean, little things like that. In other words, what he did is move me from, I remember I bought a 1964 Ford one time, but he took me out of that Ford and handed me the keys to an Escalade. And that was different.
For me, you know, it was at that point in time in my life, I was a young guy, and I was a first team All-American. First time anybody had been an All-American, probably from Kansas, and I was on the front of the street of Smith with Magic Johnson, and I was being highly recruited throughout the country. And I remember I had just visited Dean Smith at North Carolina University, and I was coming back from that visit, and that next day it was shared with me that Coach Norwood had taken a position as assistant coach here at KU. Now I wish that I could say that I was always a KU guy, and that I followed KU as a kid and all that kind of stuff, and I knew the history of KU basketball and all that, but that wouldn't be true. They hired Coach, and probably with the understanding that they probably had a pretty good opportunity to get me. And so with that hire, of course, you know, having a coach was pretty much a surrogate father to me at the time, and has always have played that role for me. And it was a no-brainer. That was one less person that I had to get adjusted to, and I knew that I didn't know exactly all the politics and all the things that were going on behind the scenes, but I knew that he would have my back. And my talent and all the things that he instilled in me as a young man, working hard, preparing, and you know, and in fact, you know, though I was pretty decent, and I was probably the best player on our team, he never allowed me to go to that point, go to that place. I never thought that I was better than anybody else, because he just kept the pedal on me as much as he would anyone. And so I never knew how good I was until he took me back to, I went to a basketball camp in high school that was illegal, totally illegal. Coach had paid the expenses for me to go to this 5-star camp. Now, Coach won't get in any trouble. Wichita Heights won't get in any trouble. That's about 40 years ago. So they're going to be okay. But he paid all the expenses, took me to this camp, this national camp, this kid from Wichita, Kansas. And all of a sudden, after the camp was over, I mean, everybody in college basketball was coming to Wichita, Kansas. And not only did they find me, they found Antoine Carr, who we thought that, you know, would stay a part of the family, and he decided to go to Wichita State. But we had a great high school team, and it just changed the map of recruiting and everything else everything went through Kansas, and it's just you know, the transition here was a lot less enduring and easier with knowing Coach Norwood was here. That's how I got here.
I can imagine that you're coming to a predominantly white institution, but at the same time you're coming with someone who has been next to you for a number of years, and your father figure, as you say, has your back. So on some levels, he maybe protected you from the rest of campus and other things that were going on.
Well, you know, the thing about athletics, and I've been so fortunate to have been blessed and gifted to have participated in athletics at that time, because a lot of those obstacles, or lack of a better word, or whatever, you know, I was able to transcend some of that. And I didn't realize the depth of the differences at the time. But as you reflect back now, it had to be huge back in the late 70s and 80s. I mean, I can only reflect and be aware of it as I've gotten older and away from it. But, you know, now you look at CNN and they do the 70s things, and you're looking at Reagan and Jimmy Carter and all these things going on. And God, way over my head, guys. I'm sorry, it was just way over my head. Just wasn't aware.
What about the Olympics?
Yeah, the Olympics, being a part of the 1980 Olympics, that was the Moscow War, and they were in Afghanistan, and it became a political
But that
thing.
brought it to you in some levels, right?
Well, you know, again, you don't realize how huge it was not to be able to play in the Olympics. I mean, that was huge. But at the time, we got a chance to go to the White House, and I guess that was good enough. Well, in the big picture, it really wasn't. Because now there's a lot of resentment, because that's an opportunity to not represent your country, not having the exposure, not having that experience. It's just it was taken away, and me and the other Olympians, we earned that by being the best, by working hard, by wanting to do that, and it was taken away.
How about your years in the NBA as well? I mean, 9 years, right?
Yes.
You're also in that transition period of the NBA, right? You're in that transition period of, you know where I'm going, a lot more money now, right? And also in college athletics, right? It is about the time you leave college athletics is when the big time shoe contracts, apparel contracts come in, changes the face of college athletics. It doesn't quite get to the NBA yet. It's going to be carrying on. What were those years like? And also going to a place like Portland.
Man, now that was a transition. Coming to Wichita to Lawrence was easy. Going to Wichita to Portland, Oregon. Now I had some soul searching on that plane ride.
Okay.
That was tough.
Where do you live today?
I live in Portland now, though.
I'm just making sure.
But at the time, I had never been exposed to that. But yeah, I mean, I think I had, and again, it's my perspective. During the 80s, I played throughout the 80s, and that was the greatest years of basketball. I mean, I played Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who was the highest scoring NBA player ever, all the way through from Magic, Bird, Dominique, Charles Barkley, and all the way up through the Jordan years. In fact, I was just speaking to a group the other day. I was playing with the Cleveland Cavaliers. We had beat the Bulls 6 straight times that year, and they came to our place and they beat us in a short 5-game series. And it's called The Shot now. With 3 seconds left on the shot, Jordan hits a jumper over Craig Elo, and season's over. And then that's a Sprite commercial. And but I had the best seat in the house. I was sitting there, and I said, "Man, why didn't you stop him? Why couldn't you stop him?" But it was a great experience. But that was the greatest era of basketball. And of course, we weren't the athletes that they are now. I mean, you have the resources available. There just wasn't the money. Wasn't there. So consequently, guys. I think players in my generation, it was a survival mechanism. You played hard. You tried to develop your skills and your traits, and every year you added something. I don't know if they have that same willingness or desire to be great. You have those that do, and they stand out big time, like the Kobe Bryants and I think Kyrie Irving wants to be great. I mean, I think, and just my opinion, I think LeBron, he was just blessed with greatness. And even though I know he works hard, but it doesn't appear that he has that same attitude as a Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan or Magic Johnson. It's just, you know, it has been a different, and it's a world of difference. The money, I think the average salary when I played was like $400,000 a year. Now the average salary is maybe $9 million. To give you some perspective, I mean, and so I think it's like I said, I think the organic, authentic investment in the players and loving them, like, I don't know if you give the same kind of love that Coach has given me, bestowed upon me as a young man growing. I mean, we're, you know, he's in his, you know, I have a different standard of what a 80-something look like. You know, because Coach, I have a different standard, and for him to bestow that kind of love on me from the time that, you know, when I was 14, 15 years old to now, I'm almost 60. I'm a year away from being 60. Coach is 80-something, and so that's that kind of enduring relationship. No, I say it because I'm proud of it. I'm proud of it. I know the investment that he's put himself. And it's rained down on me, an investment that I placed in myself, and I feel comfortable sharing. Hey, I'm 59, 83. I mean, I wish everybody that was 59, 83 was on kind of our level. Because I see a lot of people that are not happy, not physically, spiritually, emotionally, but he's bestowed that on me. And I just has taken that trait, and I'm going to try to pass it forward to the people that I touch. Because quality of life is what he's given me. And that authentic root, bring me up, endure every step of the way, I don't know if that's there in our society today as it was then. That's my opinion.
Well, let's turn into that for a little bit, for a second here with Coach, the philosophy of mentoring. I mean, I met you personally not too long ago, and in Candace's office, and was blown away by the conversation and the can-do attitude, the insight that you had talking to colleagues over the years. You know, Dr. Pennington, who knows both of you, old professor of yours, right? And shows the roots of African American studies at this department as well, right? But talk to us a little bit about mentoring and how you've seen that. And then I'd like to come back around also to where you've seen basketball change, because you're still around KU athletics. So, you know, how has that scene changed from your time at junior colleges, high school to today? But first, your philosophy on mentoring, and because you have, this relationship is special. There's no question about it. So.
Well, I think we all right now are looking at maybe somewhat of a finished product at this time, what little I've accomplished and many things as Darnell has accomplished at this point in time. But mine go back to my parents, who set my standards, which was a solid foundation of my life with values. And so I have to talk in terms of a horizontal balance first in my life. What made me who I am? What influenced my life? It's the horizontal feelings of a reverence and my belief into a divine being. And like I said, coming to KU, I have no doubts in my mind it was a divine intervention to get me where I am now, because there were too many negatives to keep me from coming in this direction. In the vertical area, when you get that in place, then you're going to come up with a horizontal feeling in which they emphasize to me over and over again. And that is, how do I treat you? I treat you as I want to be treated. So with those type of implications in my life, then I was able to establish, and I like to think in terms of my life being on a journey. Those are some of the stops that I had to make and establish with a foundation that's solid, foundation that won't shake or be shaken. And as I treat you like I like to be treated, then things are going to go well, because it's just no other direction they can go. It doesn't mean that we don't encounter issues It doesn't mean we don't encounter problems. It doesn't mean we don't encounter situations which are not all favorable. But taking that foundation and placing it, first of all, vertical and then horizontal, it makes such a much smoother ride in being, even though we have all the things around us that affected us, that everybody have. But we can handle those because of, again, the foundation that I believe in, and it gets me away and around the issues and the problems that I encounter with every day, as everybody else is. So that part has to do with my philosophy, and like I say, you're looking at a finished situation here. Change has been, in my view, as far as sports, is like Darnell, I think, emphasized. I don't know whether the desire is there for just a pure innocence of enjoying playing or participating in the game. I think the commercial aspect has entered, and it becomes more commercialized rather than a love of the game. And I think that's where I would put my emphasis at this point in time.
You know, I think one thing that Coach that has bestowed on all of us. I mean, I still talk to some of my teammates back in high school, and one of the things that we understood is that we represented, and we represented more than just who we were. I mean, it just wasn't about me. And I kind of cringe sometimes in our society. We become such a me society. What's in it for me? Call it Whiffam. What's in it for me? And the thing that kept me on the straight and narrow. I was young once upon a time, like many of you guys over here. I see the guys over here, and challenged with making choices and decisions. And you guys are confronted with so much because, I mean, everything in the world is it's just an open book now. There's nothing that nobody doesn't have access to. But my challenge was, it wasn't just about me. I represent Coach. I represent my family. I represent, the ripple effect of all that I represented from Wichita, Kansas. I represent all of Wichita. And in many places when I left, I represented Kansas. It was a reflection of who I was and how people saw me was now transposed to, that's how they see Kansas. They would have an opinion of, okay, these are how the people from Kansas are. These are how the people from Wichita are. So, the thing that we have to, as we go forward, it's not all about us, about me. It's about, the people that got me here. The University of Kansas got me here. My parents got me here. Coach Norwood got me here. You guys have got me here. That's what you have to understand and appreciate as you go forward.
At this time, I've got tons more questions, but I'm going to open it up to the audience, and we'll bring you a mic. So go ahead and raise your hand. We got one right down here. We've got two mics, so if we see another hand for a second question, we'll get that mic to you as well. So.
This is a question for Mr. Valentine. You also made changes. You were also, you had various kinds of breakthroughs, and one of them was being an academic All-American. And I was wondering if you could talk about where that dream, that ambition, that discipline, that determination came from, and naturally it never interfered with anything you were doing on the court. And I'll just give one very brief anecdote. When Jacques Vaughn was here, he was, of course, an outstanding student as well as an outstanding basketball player. And one of my students was talking one day. He said, "Boy, we've never had anybody like that before." I said, "Oh, yes, we have." But where did that come from you? What do you remember about the academic part of your time here?
Well, again, I have to beckon back to how, my support system that got me here. You guys all have heard of Justin Timberlake, right? Justin Timberlake, young guys, you guys heard of Justin Bieber? Yeah, Justin Bieber. Have you heard of Justin Case? Just in case is plan B, just in case A don't work. you know, again, I never knew how good I was. And so I knew that, you know, at some point in time, coach always prepared me, what's the worst case scenario? What's the worst case? Whether we talk investments, whether we talk about relationship, whether we talk anything, Darnell, what's the worst case scenario? Always have to be prepared for the worst case scenario. And so having a degree, having that preparation to do something other than basketball was always right there in the back of my mind.
Hi, I'm graduated in 1980, so I was there when you were playing. And just to break the levity a little bit, you versus Lynette Woodard, no dunking, game of horse, who wins?
Okay, I didn't understand any of that. I'm sorry. Tell me, repeat that for me, please.
If you were playing Lynette Woodard in a game of horse.
Oh, okay.
With no dunking, who wins?
Who was I playing? Who would I be playing?
Miss Lynette.
Oh, Lynette. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I wasn't hearing you well.
Understand, Lynette also goes back to Wichita.
Yeah, see, Lynette and I played we lived in the same neighborhood. In fact, she lived right across the street from the park where we played at every day on Pyatt. She lived directly across the street, so she was always there. I lived a block and a half from the park, and you know, Lynette was an incredible basketball player, just incredible. She broke a lot of barriers down for women athletics in general. You know, because I'm honoring her, she would beat me without dunking. She had my number. She had my number.
I'm right here.
Yep.
Sure. I would stand up, but
if you're holding your computer, it's okay.
Yeah.
She's got her
I'm holding my
written
computer, which got my question on it. So, both of you guys mentioned the desire of athletes today and their desire for basketball to be great. And you mentioned Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, all the great players. Do you think that since basketball has become more of a business after the large investments that people have made, that maybe alters the desire and puts more pressure on athletes, or does that not really have anything to do with it? Because they are chasing a lot of money. Maybe that can alter the desire to either play to make a lot of money or to play because they still love to compete.
You know, I'm certainly not going to take away from the fact that the competitive edge that athletes have to have, because it's painful to train every day. You guys all know it. I mean, you don't do that because you know you just feel like, you know, there's no driving, there's no ambition. I think the filters and the surrounding energies are somewhat contaminated. And I think people aren't truly invested in the development of some of these young athletes, and their exposure is just amazing. So consequently, you get to the NBA and they become adults, and now they don't have that support system around, and they've missed some steps of maturation. And they're not equipped to deal with certain things. And then you have players go off the edge, or actors or athletes go off the edge or whatever. And now, you know, it's a reflection on all athletes. All athletes have to, you know, have these issues. And that's not true. It's just with society today and the fast forwardness of getting people in the production line, hitting that pot of gold where the parents are trying to hit that lottery as soon as they can, or whatever the reason may be. You know, taking athletes through, even the great athletes. Fortunately, LeBron, you know, I'm really ecstatic that he has a support system and he's doing things the right way. And, you know, he hasn't had any missteps. But I can't say that about all athletes because they're not as big as LeBron. Maybe they don't have the support system, but there's athletes that just get sidetracked because maybe they just don't have that maturation, whether it's even, you hear about all the physical, physicalities between some of the athletes and their loved ones. There's something that's not right there that they miss. And we got to make sure we make sure that they enhance with that. They don't miss those steps in their development.
I appreciate the time you guys are spending with us today. It's very interesting to hear you guys talk and hear some of your perspectives. Coach, I'd like you to talk a minute about, we've heard a lot about Wichita and making the transition from Wichita to Lawrence and so forth, but you have a lot of history prior to Wichita. I understand you from Oklahoma. You went to college in our neck of the woods, Ark City and Winfield, and some of the times that Wilt, some of the battles and issues that Wilt faced when he came here. I was wondering if you faced some of those kinds of issues in Cowley County, Kansas, back in your college days. Those are your formative years, and I was wondering how some of the things you learned there influenced how you became an adult and some of your views as an adult.
Well, evidently you say you're from that area, you'll know kind of the temperament of people's attitude in that area, which was right on the line of Oklahoma, as you probably aware. Very difficult. I've been one of the first athletes at, then it was Arkansas City Junior College, playing there. They had not had very many black athletes in basketball. Again, by nature, they just couldn't play basketball. Football they could play, but basketball wasn't very popular for blacks to be playing. So fortunately, there was some success. Interest in success changes a lot of things in all of us. And fortunately, that year I went down there. My first, well, we won't get into the job that I had, but the job wasn't very good that they gave me. And so when I ended up playing there, we were fortunate enough that my coach developed me into being a pretty decent player. And I became the first All-American, top 5 in the nation, playing in Ark City. Then I began to be embraced by the community. I began to be embraced by the student body. And I began to be embraced by all the faculty. And so I knew then that I had to conduct myself in such a manner that those who followed behind me would have some kind of standard to live on. So I had to really absorb and digest some interesting words and treatment during that time. But I still knew I had to do it because somebody had to, because there had to be some kind of example that the younger people are going to have to follow. And now I don't think there's any problem at all to speak of. I couldn't even go to the movies at that time. And then every once in a while, my coach would go down and talk to the manager of the theater to allow me to go to the movies, and then I had to sit upstairs. So those are the kind of things you did, but I had to do it because there were the people coming along behind me that had to have something to do or have an opportunity to enjoy some of the same social events. And so there were other things that happened, but those were just some of the minor things on the deal. And I knew I had to get my grades. That's some of the things that, again, my parents taught me. I don't want to be remiss without mentioning them. Without them, I would have, and their demands on me, there would never been the things that you see now. But they were very demanding. And so that's what actually changed my attitude toward being involved in athletics.
I think as we go to Nick, I just want to echo and bring to point, I think also your question and what Coach is saying here a little bit more directly. Kansas is a place that loves to claim itself as the free state. We just had Kansas Day. And the one thing we don't talk about is segregation existed here, right? Brown v. Board happens, it's one of the cases because segregation was here. And that's an important thing to remember. And we have talked about it more in recent years. around Wilt Chamberlain and coming to the University of Kansas and Lawrence. And what Coach is telling us is that obviously it didn't only exist at Lawrence. And I think that's an important thing for us to remember and to tease that out and discuss. So, yeah.
So from when you were playing, when you were coaching, how do you feel the role of the athlete has changed, especially considering the fact that politics are so relative in our society?
Do you have a mic?
Speak a little bit louder. Yep.
I said, from when you were playing and when you were coaching, how do you feel the role of the athlete has changed, especially considering the fact that politics is so involved in pretty much everything nowadays?
As a player as well as a coach?
Has politics affected the way things are run now because politics is involved with everything? Was it there when you were a coach and a player? Has it changed today? And I think both of you would be an interesting answer to that. Well, he's going to defer to you. You see that move?
Well, you can't sit on the sideline anymore and just, I can appreciate Michael Jordan, but Michael Jordan was selling so much product and he didn't want to alienate anyone from buying his product that he wasn't real forthright during his heyday of coming forward and taking on social issues. And I think with you have a Twitter following or Instagram following of millions of people. Anytime you have a thought and you put it out there, when you're in that position, you have to know that you represent more than just an athlete. When you're in that position, it's important that you become knowledgeable of the issues so that you can respond in a way that is to be interpreted as your response and not just off the top of your head because it's instant. I mean, once you put stuff out there, it's out there, and you have to know what you're talking about. You just can't, because you get too much exposure, and you represent so much of the voices that people don't have. And so it's an obligation, especially, I'm not talking about a guy, that's a role player or the 9th or 10th player, but when you're a LeBron James or when you are, some of the Kyrie Irving or Steph Curry, you have to represent. Just can't, there's no way around it. Because you're going to be confronted. They're not going to go away. They're going, well, what does Steph think about this? What does Kevin Durant think about this? And you can't just, I don't know. That ain't gonna happen. That ain't gonna work. So you have to understand. You have to have a real comprehensive development program. You got people around you, help you grow, help you articulate what you want to say, help you connect and relate with people because you're the voice. Back in you got the Bill Russells, the Jim Browns, and the Muhammad Alis that were speaking because the issues in that day. Well, we've come a long way, but there's areas, there's voids that need to be readdressed, obviously.
Anything to add?
I think he's covered. He's covered.
Well, I'd like to give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you very much. And I'm going to, look at that.
So what part of? I wasn't aware of what this was going to be about, really, and all that it means. All the constituents out there. What part of the community or the university are you guys from? I see a group of guys over here. Look like you're from a team, or you play. Are you guys with the team over here?
So how many students are there? Raise your hands. How many students? Let's go that way.
Oh wow.
Great.
Wow.
Great.
How many student athletes we got in the room?
Oh, wow.
How many people from the community, broadly? How many faculty members we have?
Wow. Wow. Well, let me tell you, I am so honored to be here and have a chance to reconnect. I've been living in Oregon since I was drafted out there in '81. I got familiar with it and comfortable with it because the Portland Trailblazers is the only game in town, so they still look at me like I play today. So it was a real easy transition, but I really, from the bottom of my heart, and I'm a Valentine, so you know that's deep. I thank Coach Norwood and we absolutely, of course, Coach can speak for himself, but I love this opportunity, and I would, any way you can use me in the future, just don't hesitate.
I thank you again.
Yeah.
And I do always have to say, she won't like this public attention, but you will appreciate this. So this part of the program is always done in connection with athletics in general, but it is done with Candace Dumback. And Candace, I appreciate this every year. You always know the people to bring, the people to put on the stage. You know how they will interact, and you promised me that this would be a dynamic conversation, and I've loved it every step of the way. So thank you very much, Candace. So we're going to step off, and we're going to introduce our colleague Jordan Bass from Health and Exercise Science and Sports Management, who is going to introduce our keynote speaker of the evening.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Jordan Bass, and I'm the Associate Chair for Health, Sport, and Exercise Science and the Program Director for Sport Management here at the University of Kansas. It is really, truly an honor to introduce our keynote speaker tonight, Claire Smith. Claire spent more than 3 decades as a newspaper reporter and columnist, including stints with the New York Times, Philadelphia Inquirer, and currently ESPN. She also wanted me to make sure that I mentioned that she is a proud native of Pennsylvania and is very excited for the game on Sunday. She holds the distinction as the first woman to cover a major league professional baseball team full-time when she was assigned to the New York Yankees beat for the Hartford Courant in 1982, of which she said about the tumultuous Yankees at the time, "They hardly noticed me because they were holding on for dear life." Last July, Claire was honored with the top honor for a baseball writer, the J.G. Taylor Spink Award, during the Hall of Fame weekend in Cooperstown. She was the 68th recipient of the award, the 68th recipient and the first woman to ever win the award. Among other notable accolades, Claire has earned the Legacy Award from the National Association of Black Journalists, the Mary Garber Pioneer Award from the Association for Women in Sports Media, and the Sam Lacey Legacy Award from the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. I'll end my introduction with a passage from the New York Times piece on Claire's speech at the Hall of Fame. The author wrote about Claire. Her greatest challenge came from San Diego Padres during the 1984 playoff series. She was ejected from the clubhouse, then rescued by player Steve Garvey, who fed her quotes from his teammates. But Smith was no quote-unquote damsel in distress. She had an unbending professionalism about her that wore down the most stubborn resistance that existed. Her award is a formal acknowledgement that men do not own the exclusive rights to the most powerful written words. It's truly an honor to have her here with us tonight, and please help me welcome a true pioneer to this stage, Claire Smith.
Wow. Hello, everyone. Good evening. I was sitting here thinking about what I will take from this experience, and I projected to this time tomorrow evening, and it's going to give a whole new spin to the phrase, "I'm not in Kansas anymore," because I will be truly sad, because I will have had to say goodbye, and also just want you all to know how wonderful this has been. Just thank you for having me. It's a kind, wonderful welcome. The University of Kansas. On Sunday, a lot of Philadelphians are going to be bragging about this game that's taking place, but I'm going to tell them I was at Kansas, and that's where Wilt Chamberlain walked and learned his profession, and no one product of Philadelphia stands taller, literally, figuratively, than Wilt Chamberlain. So thank you for all you did for Wilt Chamberlain. Wilt grew up in West Philly, and my mom's family, her parents lived there after immigrating from Jamaica, so she had to answer the question, did you ever meet Wilt? And she told me that she hadn't, but she saw him. She was sitting in a car one day, and a group of kids walked by the car, but one she could only see from the knees down, so she knew that she had just had an encounter with Wilt. I am so impressed and so grateful to the Langston Hughes Center and Director Sean Alexander for inviting me to participate in your 4th annual Symposium on Race, Sports, and Society. I would not be doing any justice to all the reasons Sean had for inviting me if I didn't add a category, and that's going to be gender. A lot of the experiences I've had, thank you, have come about because in my small list of pioneering events, more had to do with gender than race. But certainly, as I don't separate being African American woman, I don't split them up. It's often done for me. It wasn't the first time I'd been asked, but a student of Sean's asked me today what was more difficult, being a woman or being an African American. Throughout my career, 36 years of covering or working for entities that cover Major League Baseball, never had one problem that I ever saw, felt, or sensed that had to do with race. It was really tough to be overtly racist covering sports that had many prominent African Americans in the locker room. They belonged to a larger family, if you will, and if they saw that racism spill over onto a journalist, they would have come to defense immediately. Time has not run out on being ignorant when it comes to being a sexist. Our headlines tell us that more than ever as brave women speak out. So it's much more of an issue for women to this day to walk into predominantly male-oriented sports leagues and walk out unscathed. Okay, I want to get that out of the way, so I'm adding gender to this as well. Serving as the keynote speaker is not only an amazing privilege, but it's also an awesome responsibility. So I thank you again, Sean, for asking me. And truthfully, I also find myself asking a question that I've posed in my head a lot since being named the J.G. Taylor Spink Award winner, and that's why me? I wanted to go to work every day, and 35 years later, my peers said, well, that was pretty amazing that you did that for 35 years. I only saw myself as literally doing my job, skating my lane, following a dream, but most of all, just being a messenger and being the best that I could at doing that. I saw the list of your previous keynote award speakers. I can't construct a thesis or lead athletes and institutions to discover their better selves through the academic world as Dr. Harry Edwards does so capably. Try as I might, I'll never be the wordsmith that my friend and peer Bill Rhoden is. He's such a talent, such a mentor, and I thank him to this day. Thank you, Bill, for everything you've done for me. Yet here I am on the stage following the good doctor and Bill and Dave Zirin, the iconic political sports columnist, as a deliverer of this address. It's humbling to be in their company, to say the least. And so, Sean, here I am, and because you asked, I now start. Where to start? I believe it will be with a request. Please allow me to revisit the who, what, where, when, and why. As journalism students, you know, the 5 W's of journalism, in order to examine how those 5 W's captured my attention, sparked my imagination for the last 39 years in this business. I believe these questions have everything to do with the reason Sean asked me here tonight, for they show the threads that help weave tonight's topics together throughout my life. Who am I? I'm an American. I'm an African American. I'm the great-granddaughter of a freed slave on one side and the granddaughter of Jamaican immigrants on the other. I am the daughter of a mother who was a scientist and a father who was an artist. To me, Bernice and Bill Smith were 2 of the most outstanding members of the greatest generation within the greatest generation this nation has ever known. Their struggles and triumphs and their ability to love a nation that did not always love them back taught me invaluable lessons. They showed me an admiration of sports that was contagious. They so admired the abilities of games to show the value of the meritocracy systems that their tales of Jackie Robinson and Jesse Owens, Joe Louis, made such stars feel like part of our family. I was sharing the story earlier this afternoon about how my mother, who was born in New York City but sent back to Jamaica as an infant because her health was not good, and her grandmother back in Jamaica was the area's I don't want to say, well, the country doctor. She was the midwife. She had the potions and all the cure-alls that could nurse this baby to health. And so she was there for her first 16 years. And she told me about how Jamaicans would sit in the little country store or in the homes that were blessed enough to have shortwave radios. And why would they gather? To listen to Joe Louis fights, to listen to hear tales of Jesse Owens, to look across the Caribbean at a country that really was to them that shining city on the hill, and dream of being a part of this. My mom, an American citizen by birth, finally came to America at the start of World War II. She was actually on a passenger ship heading to England to start a college career when the war broke out and all the ships were rerouted and sent to the U.S. And so she moved in with her parents, the maid and the chauffeur of a rich family in Philadelphia. She settled into Philadelphia life. She ended up at Temple University, brilliant student, Hallahan High School, the girls' high of a Catholic school system there, and eventually followed her dream. She became a chemist after graduating from Morgan State. She worked in the space program at General Electric in the missile system. I met the monkey that went into space as a little child. She helped invent a fuel cell that was put in the missile that took John Glenn into space. She was my hidden figure, but she was certainly my hero more than not. Dad was an artist out of Catonsville, Maryland. He graduated from the Philadelphia Museum of Art School, otherwise known as the place that Rocky ran up the stairs to get his last exercise in. Proud Philadelphians, and I'm a proud Philadelphian and a proud daughter of Bernice and Bill Smith. My parents were my heroes, as I said, and their heroes were my heroes as well. And all from Mom and Dad to Rachel and Jackie and beyond, they helped make me who I am and helped guide me here tonight. My mom loved the Dodgers. She loved the Dodgers because of Jackie. She made darn sure that I loved the Dodgers too. And I did. I can't remember a time when I didn't know his story, didn't know Rachel's story. I was in 3rd grade when the nuns at St. James Elementary School in Elkins Park, Pennsylvania, spirited our class to the basement, to the church, and showed us a movie, The Jackie Robinson Story, starring Ruby Dee as Rachel Robinson, but starring Jackie Robinson as Jackie Robinson. I knew his story, but to see his face, to hear his voice, to see the footage from games, I was gone. I was just hooked, and I've loved baseball ever since. Always knew that it would be in my heart, and eventually I figured out how to make it a part of my life. What am I? I'm a woman, one who works in a profession that still is attempting to find a big enough hammer to shatter still standing glass ceilings and walls across the board. And I cover sports institutions that are, shall we say, still noticeably male-dominated. And sports like corporate America, like the entertainment industry, like journalism, sports are still guilty of keeping and producing too many dark and ugly secrets when it comes to gender. Me too? Yes, me too. There are secrets about race, about gender, about biases too numerous to mention. They're being exposed today as never before, brought to light by women and men of all colors, from the tiniest and youngest of athletes to the mightiest players in Hollywood, Wall Street, and journalism. It is a movement that has entwined with our sports, with our society. There's no turning back. Time's up, you bet. What am I also? Well, I'm not a sports journalist. I am rather a journalist who happens to work at the art of covering sports. I chronicle, edit, and suggest. I watch and observe to the best of my ability. I think, and I seek to contribute to a greater product by helping to shape coverage that transcends sports, pushing myself and encouraging others to commit to seeing more than just balls and strikes. This all helps form part and parcel of the answer to my favorite question out of the 5 W's, and that is why. It is my belief that as journalists, we journalists are citizens not only of our departments, of our print or electronic media, of our sports shows, and our outlets, but we're also citizens, more importantly, of this nation and this world. As such, I truly feel we should resist siloing issues to the detriment of any one of the larger communities to which we belong. That is why I've always strived to explore how race and gender, sports and society intersect. These entities are inextricably linked, and no fiat from a government, a team owner, or a horde of Russian bots can make that not so. So from the Philadelphia Bulletin and Inquirer to the New York Times and now ESPN, that's the where, I've been afforded opportunities to have a seat at the table, to be that seat on a news desk or in press row. I am so blessed that after 4 decades to still be asked to be in the rooms where ideas are born. And for all of the above reasons, what I've been able to witness, study, and learn has become very much a part of who I am. The countless lessons found in the sacrifices of so many generations of athletes, sports executives, and yes, journalists who cover them are indelible. It may no longer be Muhammad Ali or Wilma Rudolph, Jim Brown or Bill Russell, Kareem or Bob Gibson being told to keep his or her place on and keep their minds just solely on sports, or just entertain us and be grateful for the privilege. Today's athletes are being barraged with the same admonitions. Play, damn it. Don't think. Don't look to your communities and speak for them. Still, these players we cover do speak out, maybe more so than ever before. They dare to stage peaceful protest. He or she can still be seen taking a knee, bowing a head, or questioning everything from wage inequality to the animus behind a malicious nightstick swing, or a suspiciously spent bullet, or a certain badge. Like those who came before them, today's athlete can and does pay a price should he or she speak out. Just ask Colin Kaepernick. The former NFL quarterback to this day wears a target on his back that looks suspiciously like a presidential seal. And in the just completed regular season in which quarterbacks were felled by the dozens, he still could not find a job in a league where he once starred. Other consequences? Countless NFL, NBA, and WNBA players heard their cries for justice for victims of police brutality and an off-skewed judicial system answered with venomous taunts that questioned their patriotism and insulted their mothers, and in the case of NFL players, maligned their manhood. These men and women chose to ignore the treacherous domains of public opinion and social media. They did so in order to assure that sports continue to play a significant role in the development of a healthier, more accepting culture. Thank God. Thank God for those who refuse to bow despite the risk to livelihoods and even, still in our area, life itself. Now, to use your name and your notoriety on behalf of others certainly can be a vital tool. Muhammad Ali used his ability to wrap his defiance in both wisdom and wit. Jackie mixed grit and grace and a grim determination to sacrifice for the greater good. He hasn't played in over half a century, and yet he still inspires. He still certainly inspires me. Venus Williams, she defied tennis to justify its notion that women are not worthy of the same winnings as men. Venus, like the champion that she is, persevered. Yes, she really persevered. History shows there were prices to be paid for stepping outside the lines. The human toll taken won't be found in record books, but in the stories, the flesh and blood recounting. Jackie was old before his time, his body worn not only by a game, but by the choice to be the civil rights pioneer decades before Dr. King took the baton. Other lesser-known stories were and are just as poignant. I'd like to share one in particular with you. Who remembers Willie Stargell? Oh, nice. He was the chairman of the famed Pittsburgh Pirates Lumber Company, the man mountain who stood taller than Paul Bunyan in my eyes, whose bat seemed so small in his hands that it was often likened to a toothpick. But I remember Willie for another reason. I remember him for sharing insight into the America in which he was raised. A youngster who spent the bulk of his childhood in California, he did not know the overt racism of much of the South until his pursuit of baseball carried him to the Jim Crow South and the Texas League, where he was one of the first African Americans to play on that circuit. Texas is where that dear man received death threats from the Klan and others who opposed integration back in the day. The vows to shoot him dead if he took his position in the outfield were as unsubtle as they were frightening. Willie, like Jackie before him, still chose to play. He chose the freedom of choice over fear. But he told me one day in his early go-rounds in the Texas League, a car beyond the outfield fence backfired. That noise, so like the shotgun blast he'd been warned could come his way, caused that mountain of a man, to use Willie's words, lose his water. Who says there's no crying in baseball? Because Willie cried that day. He told me that story. And so too did I. It's hard to imagine now that lives like Willie's, like Henry Aaron's, like Jackie's, and Larry Doby's, they were threatened because they had the audacity to want to play baseball. Livelihoods such as Muhammad Ali's and the Olympians Tommy Smith and John Carlos, too, were derailed or ended because of the athletes' political, moral, and ethical stances, or because they chose merely to exercise the right to peacefully protest. Countless other kinds of indignations were endured. Willie, as proud a man as I've ever encountered, told me of how teammates, well-meaning or otherwise, would rub his head for good luck. Why? Well, it turns out it was a throwback to the antebellum South, where rubbing the heads of those little statuettes of black stable boys, lawn jockeys, was a thing, supposed to bring you good luck. Hall of Fame newspaper legends Sam Lacey and Wendell Smith, the fellows who put the stories of Jackie and other black athletes out in public, who championed their causes while pushing sports to integrate, they had their stories too of the indignities suffered with an amazing grace on their part. These great journalists from historically black publications had to buy tickets and sit in the stands in order to cover sports. Why? Press boxes were closed to them, even as Jackie and others integrated the fields. By the time I arrived, signs declaring that no women or children were to be permitted in press boxes still hung in some major league ballpark press boxes, and that was 1982. So you can imagine that when I saw those signs, barring me and any child I apparently would have taken to the press box, I could only imagine what they said just a decade or two earlier about race. The thought of such indignities make me nauseous to this day, and it reminds me to never forget the slaps and the slights others endured so that all of us might never have to suffer this similar outrages. So I choose to remember for Willie and Wendell and Sam, as well as all the other barrier breakers, my new friend, Mr. Norwood. Now, I know that Jim Crow is dead. I know that many of the most memorable legends to take the front lines of causes such as civil rights and gender equality have long been off the playing fields. Hard to believe, but Jesse Owens stared down Hitler way back in 1936 at the Olympic Games in Berlin. And Joe Louis and Larry Doby fought fascism in a world war that ended in 1945. Jackie and Branch Rickey, they joined forces to integrate baseball 76 years ago this coming April. And Bill Russell walked with Dr. King in the 1963 March on Washington, ancient history to so many of you in this room. Tommy Smith and John Carlos, they raised their fist in Mexico City 50 years ago this coming summer. Their sacrifices Their sacrifices enabled large segments of the subsequent generations of athletes to see beyond black and white. Now, some cynics might say the prior hardships allowed the privileged to see only green. I wasn't going to mention him, but you did, Darnell, so I look to Michael Jordan's generation, if you will, as kind of the lost generation, because people so easily disappeared behind their gated communities, sold products, and forgot that, many of the kids pining to wear their shoes were even hungrier for role models and direction to be good citizens, and all too many athletes wanted were the dollars that many of their parents could ill afford to spend. That selling of sneakers outstripped stumping for your fellow man for too many and for too long. Yet time, thankfully, did not completely diminish the lessons or legacies of yesteryear's heroes on the front lines. And today's activism and the need for it shows that the old guard, what the old guard did, remains relevant. In so many cases, that is so painfully clear. Who can possibly deny in this year of 2018 that race and sports and gender and their effects on society do not combine to make as volatile a topic as they did in the 30s, 40s, 60s, and 70s? Today's headlines and cries for justice are so similar to yesteryear's that it is an eerie reminder that the work is not yet done. It also makes one wonder, would not Jackie or Joe Louis or others have taken a knee, no matter the protests from the White House and beyond? There is such a time continuum to all these hot-button issues. Thankfully, what also remains is a constant, and that is the time-honored belief held by many an athlete, coach, executive, and reporter that the stifling parameters drawn up by others, like so many foul lines and court boundaries, can and must be ignored. Colin Kaepernick and LeBron James, Venus and Serena, coaches like Greg Popovich and Steve Kerr, journalists like Jamel Hill, Robin Roberts, Bill Rhoden, they've all used their platforms. They've all used and risked their names and their celebrity to maintain their commitment to something larger than themselves. Whether their movements can be sustained, their commitments maintained, that really remains to be seen. Meanwhile, we shall watch, write, and record. And we will look for that telltale gesture, that turn of phrase that will remind of Ali again. We will continue to believe that we will know it when we see it, that stance of Jackie Robinson, that brave, brave man. When we do, the chills and the admiration we'll give, that we will garner from that, will make it clear that something more important than the playing and winning of games is taking place. So I consider it just that many of those who can so command audiences with their athletic skills have and will continue to and choose to do more. Again, there will always be consequences. Just ask Mr. Kaepernick. But when such athletes and others connected with sports cross lines others expect them to not fudge, we in the media will continue to ask why. And you, like I hope, will never expect to hear many regrets. We certainly haven't heard remorse or what-ifs from Colin Kaepernick. When last seen, the one-time NFL quarterback was still not permitted to hold the football, but nonetheless still was holding his head pretty darn high. Yes, he sacrificed. He also persisted, and no one could ever ask for anything more. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Oh, sure.
Again, same thing. We have some.
Well, I got the 5 most important questions out of the way, so. Okay. Hello. Hello.
Hello again. Thank you for being our keynote speaker and coming to our class.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. My question is, from your perspective, how has Black masculinity changed through the years in sports?
Oh, well, not being a Black male, give me a second to think about that. I'm sure just as Hollywood's uglier days tried to use it as a weapon to divide the country, the first African American athletes were presented as threats. You know, lock up your children, your wives, your mothers, your daughters, and demonized for being athletic. I went back into the newspaper morgue at the Philadelphia Bulletin. I'm sorry, I'm being very Philadelphian and swallowing my T's. The Philadelphia Bulletin's morgue, which is where all the clippings are kept, contained a lot of deceased newspapers. So I went back and looked up the articles written about Jackie Robinson the day that he first came to Philadelphia. The way he was portrayed and described by some of the most mainstream media in the country made me cry. I took the clippings out and I took them to my sports editor and asked him to please explain to me how in this country we could have noted newspaper people write, well, yes, he has the athletic skills, but he cannot make it because he doesn't have the mental ability to solve this game. He doesn't have the courage. He doesn't have this, or have him referred to in such terms that likened him to animals. Do we see that to this day? Oh, so-and-so, Darryl Strawberry is a natural athlete. He runs like a gazelle. He does this, he does that. But gee, his counterpart over there from the Caucasian race, he's a thinker. He's going to be a manager one day. He works hard. The codes have changed over time. I think they still are used to denigrate far too many athletes. As far as the masculinity, I'm just, you keep asking me questions that I'm having a difficult time trying to describe. I hope that helped, but always be on guard for those terms. The football players who are here, please don't let anybody write more than once that you're articulate. That's an insult. Articulate as opposed to what? Are we supposed to be surprised that you can put a sentence together? You don't have to put a sentence together to be president of the United States, apparently. But somehow we're supposed to be astounded that a black athlete can put a sentence together. So journalists, future journalists, mark that word, write it down, and please don't ever be tempted to use it to divide, because it is as backhanded a compliment as you can ever give. So is comparing an athlete to an animal. because it suggests that it's an innate thing. It's born in them. They don't have to work. Darryl Strawberry can wake up on Christmas Eve and run out a triple, requiring no work, no forethought, no, weightlifting or whatever. So it's still there. It's just a little more subtle, but it still hurts. It still stings. And it's not just, it's for any minority you want to identify as having these quiet slights. Tony Perez, Hall of Famer, told me that when he was playing for the Cincinnati Reds, he really fought like crazy to get a command of the language, English. He was born in Cuba. But after a game, if he had a big game, he'd watch the media go to Johnny Bench or Joe Morgan or Pete Rose to ask them what Tony was thinking about his big game. He played there for a decade in Cincinnati, and so there were reporters who never spoke to him. He moved on to Montreal, talk about a language barrier on top of a language barrier, had his first endorsement offers in Montreal, had reporters fight through the French barrier to the English barrier to ask him questions that he never heard in Cincinnati. These are such subtle ways of making a person feel small, making them feel lesser. And as journalists, that's just doing a bad job. And we should always be aware of that, how you're presenting yourself. Are you projecting the respect that you expect in return? So, boy, yes, I'm sorry, I meander. I'm a bad interview. So, where's the mic?
I'm back here.
Oh, hi. Okay.
I'm a former journalist, so you're going to get a current events question. Sure. I worked with Kevin Blackistone at the Dallas Morning News and Joe Drape when he was there. Going back some, Joe, I think, ended up at the New York Times, too. I'm a huge Washington Nationals fan. On tonight's topic, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about managers in baseball. We're still heartbroken about losing Dusty Baker. And will we ever see Jason Worth on a baseball field again?
Yes. The world never seems to run out of a place for Jason Worth to play. So, and this is probably why baseball players are not favorites of football players and basketball players, because baseball money is just flat out guaranteed whether you play or not. And I love the headlines, such and such a quarterback signs for $1 gazillion. And all I can think is, how much of it is guaranteed? It's not all, hardly any of it. So baseball has a real serious issue. Jackie Robinson would not celebrate Jackie Robinson Day every April 15th, I'm convinced, because the appeal of the game has been lost on the African American community with good reason, but there are also, I think, forces that are combining to push African Americans off the field and therefore out of pipelines to the front offices and to the dugout as managers and coaches. There were 7, I believe, 7 managerial changes in the off season. Baseball has its Bud Selig rule, which commands teams to diversify their pools, their candidate pools. Not one African American was interviewed for one single managerial opening this winter. When asked about this, the commissioner of baseball said, "Oh, we're very happy with where the Selig rule stands, because God bless them, Alex Cora and Dave Martinez have jobs, and well-deserved. They're great baseball people, but baseball looks at its rainbow of faces, and they don't notice or choose not to notice that African Americans are systematically dying off in baseball. There were 13 teams with one or fewer African Americans. Very diverse teams, because there's Asia and there's Latin America, and there are people of all walks of life, color, in those clubhouses. But what happened to the Jackie Robinsons of the world? Where did it go so badly off the rails that African American kids just choose to? Are we choosing not to play? Do we not have the access to baseball? Baseball runs a Reviving Baseball in the Inner Cities League, but when it comes down to these teams and the rosters, they're just so few and far between. Adam Jones was asked, Adam Jones, the All-Star center fielder for the Orioles, was asked why no baseball players were taking a knee in support of the causes that Colin Kaepernick and NBA players were championing. And he said, because we can be made to disappear. He said that as the only African American on the Baltimore Orioles. The Yankees last year did not have an African American player. Every single Yankee wore number 42 on April 15th. But who do you go to ask, why aren't you kneeling? There's no one to ask. There was a young man from Africa on the Pittsburgh Pirates last season, and I believe he's going to be on the Toronto Blue Jays this year. But I suggested to ESPN, I said, do you know that the Pittsburgh Pirates have more Africans than 3 major league teams have African Americans? It's just hard to understand and fathom what's going on. But last year, the representation on the field among players was the lowest it's been since 1958. There were 5 starting pitchers. There hasn't been an African-American catcher in about 2 decades. I know that players' parents are saying, go to college, get your degree, take that scholarship. Baseball still isn't dependent on colleges to serve as its minor leagues. So therefore, hey, if I had a son who was playing sports and the choice was the Texas League for a $2,000 signing bonus or KU with you better go to class and you will have your degree, I'd push too. But I think there are other, maybe more insidious reasons for what's going on. A lot of theories going on. But the fact that no one got an interview this past winter when the Terry Pendletons and the Willie Randolphs and people are still waving their hands in the air, got a lot of people's attention, and I think you're going to be hearing a lot more about that before April 15th comes along. There's a lot of anger right now amongst the generation of former players who know that they used to have just a really nice niche in baseball, and it doesn't exist anymore. Yes, sir.
Where would Curt Flood fit in your pantheon of heroes?
Oh, right at the top. And I think that it's a disgrace that his peers haven't seen fit to put him in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, he's sort of, I think he's, if you ask lots and lots of players today who have all benefited from his, they wouldn't even know who he is. Why is that?
Well, I think that we entered that dark period of the 1980s. I don't know if you remember Vince Coleman being asked about Jackie Robinson. I don't know nothing about no Jackie Robinson. There was a period where athletes really, it was all about me, as Darnell said. So there was a lot of history that was ignored or belittled, what have you. You're talking about veterans committees now made up of the beneficiaries of this upward escalator that has yet to find the top, who won't vote Marvin Miller in. If you can't get Marvin Miller into the Hall of Fame, Curt Flood probably has so little chance to get in. I think Freud would love to get some of the players who are on those committees to explain why they don't support the men who made it economically possible to be the biggest and most powerful union in terms of earning money and earning rights, most powerful sports union in the world. I don't get it. I don't get it. So.
Hi, good evening.
Oh, hi.
Hello.
Okay.
I'm curious, 3 days ago we got great news that the highly racist mascot of the Cleveland baseball team was removed, or will be removed at the end of 2018.
Yes.
I think it's progress, but I'm curious on your thoughts if A, if that is enough, and B, if that will ever translate to the Washington football team.
Yes, so we had a wonderful discussion this afternoon in Sean's class about this. It won't be enough until the Native American populations, or even the population of one Native American, says our work is done. We no longer feel belittled or stereotyped by sports everywhere. My high school, the Chamonix High School in Langhorne, Pennsylvania, is apparently one of the 53 remaining schools in the country that uses the Redskins nickname. It's a controversy there, as I'm sure it is in every community that uses it. I like our chances, perhaps, of getting rid of it before the Washington Redskins team is forced to, because I see no pressure whatsoever from the league in telling, no pressure coming from the league in trying to convince the Redskins that it's time for that to go. They support the Redskins and their right to use the name. It was long past time for Chief Wahoo to go. And Chief, it's not like everybody's saying that Chief Wahoo is the same, the abomination is the same to use the logo on the Braves hat, because it's not a stereotype. It's not the Native American version of Little Black Sambo or the Native American version of the caricatures that Hitler used in cartoons to demean and disgrace the Jewish population. This is an ugly symbol. It demeans people, and it's its second dismissal by the Indians. Hopefully they'll never have to make that decision again. They brought it back, and it's very popular in Ohio. And I'm sure they gave them a year's grace period so that they can sell their product, move it off the shelf, but guaranteed they're going to crank those out too. They're going to make as much money off of it as possible, but they have committed to getting rid of it, and it's long overdue, in my opinion. Hello.
My question was also about the Cleveland Indians, and I just wondered just one additional. When the last time we were talking about the Washington Redskins in any substantial way, which was kind of last season around a flutter of activity, when the debate kind of was being reopened, on Pardon the Interruption, Tony Kornheiser and Mike Wilbon both said, they're not going to say the word Redskins on the air. They're just going to refer to the team as Washington. And it seemed to me that the sports writers such as yourself and sports commenters actually have a role to play in choosing not to use some of these words in print and in your conversation to refer to Cleveland rather than the Indians or otherwise. And I wonder just what you think about that, if you actually have that kind of control, or if that's an editorial decision that you don't get to control even at your level, at your stature, or if you think that's the kind of thing that could be, you know, in a way symbolic like kneeling, but really important if we were to start noticing a change in how people talked in sports.
I think ESPN has left it up to each individual on-air talent, and the numbers, I think, are large of commentators and play-by-play people. They have the choice whether to call the team by its city name or by its nickname. I was sharing a story with Sean's class. Our newspaper in high school, the Play Wikia, it's going on 3 years ago now. The students who run that newspaper got together and decided that they would not use the word Redskin. They would use Neshaminy. I thought it was brave and bold. It didn't cause a ripple. What caused a ripple was the school board convening a meeting and ordering the students at the newspaper to use the word Redskin. That was a bad day. It sent the terrible messages it sent to those students on so many levels. Don't think. Don't be yourself. Don't follow your conscience. And darn it, school tradition is more important than whether we're insulting anyone. Unbelievable decision. So I think that Tony and Mike have a lot more power, if you will, to do what they want, and I applaud them for that. I just put together notes for our game crews and for Baseball Tonight. I do not use Indians. I would certainly never use the word Redskin. I call them Cleveland. Cleveland's Terry Francona. No, I just can't bring myself to do that.
Time for one more question.
Hello.
Hi, I appreciate you coming to our class earlier this morning. And my question is, I have two questions. So, do you think journalists play a role in creating colorblind racism? And also, do you believe that the mainstream media's view of black athletes requiring white supervision contributes at all towards the public's view of mass incarceration and the naturalization of it?
Certainly, I think that our discussion earlier about just words hurt, images portrayed, it can lead people to besmirch the hard work of any athlete using the phrases that suggest that black athletes somehow don't work as hard or have a disadvantage. We've heard Serena's feminism question. Look at those muscles, look at this, look at that. And people will write those things or just off the cuff say those things without thinking of the consequences. What is the message you're sending? It's hard to write on deadline. It's hard to police yourself. But darn it, you have to. You have to, before you hit that send button, just as you all are encouraged, don't tweet until you read it again. Don't hit that send button. It's out there. You can't get it back. Words hurt. They really do. I once had a wonderful conversation with Ken Griffey Sr., who came into New York, and he had an amazing chip on his shoulder. He was he had walls built around him, and he lashed out at a reporter one day, and I took him aside and, "What are you doing?" "Well, I've been treated badly in my life and this and that." I said, "Not by him. He's never written anything but laudatory articles about you. He treats you fairly. I know him. He's one of my best friends on this beat. What you did was wrong. And may I just share this with you, Ken? You're in New York. There were 12 newspapers at that time that traveled, or 9 newspapers that traveled with the team. He came from a city that had, I believe, 2 newspapers at the time. They're down to 1 in Cincinnati. There were radio stations with megaphones, WFAN, and the advent of talk radio, if you will. And then there were all the local outlets that would descend, their reporters would descend on Yankee Stadium, so it always looked like a World Series was taking place. Couldn't swing a bat without hitting a reporter. And I said to him, "You have to decide if you really want to go to war with people that have 1 million barrels of ink at their disposal and go to war based on something that did not happen." I always hoped that I showed them how it was going to bounce off of us and go back. We're humans. You slap at us, what's our first instinct? Sad but true. In a lot of cases, it's to slap back, and slap back even harder than you hit. And by the time Ken was traded a few years later, I thought there were tears in the eyes of reporters because he relaxed. He showed us an incredible insight into baseball. He was funny. Bill Cosby told Ken he should be in comedy. That's how funny he was. But the insight he brought, the honesty, the lack of cliches, the willingness to talk to us, to teach us something about the game he had mastered, it was electric by the end. It was a terrible day when they traded him to Atlanta. There was anger in the press room because we were going to miss him. And the relationship was great. We work on nurturing that professional relationship. I think that we just have to be honest with each other. We have to be honest. There was an African American on Yankees that I stopped speaking to because every time he saw me, he'd make a remark like, "Oh, I love women with big titties." And it just went on, and I stopped speaking to him. And he came to me one day and said, "Why don't you talk to me anymore?" And I said, "Why don't you respect me for the job that I'm doing?" And I told him exactly why. He apologized, and from that day on, we had a great relationship. So it really is such a two-way street. We do have probably more power than perhaps we should, but that's a war no one wins. And for the silly reasons it's often fought, it's just sad. It really is. It really, really is. Thank you. Michael Jordan's on the phone.
Jordan's calling.
Michael Jordan is calling you.
He thinks Jordan's calling you. Well, thank you again, Claire. This has been wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. And, you know, she started this by talking about all the other journalists out there and the wordsmiths, but as you saw, she's a wordsmith herself and brought everything that I hoped you would, and it was just beautiful. If we could get the other 2 guests to join us, we have a KU tradition of giving bags of gifts. As thank you, and I would like to thank everyone for coming out. This is the 4th annual. I hope to see you next year at the 5th annual. A tough act to follow, but I look forward to seeing you all here. And people will be around if you have some questions that you might want to ask individually for a little while. That'd be great. But again, thank you all for coming, and have a great night.